Everything appears to be coming up Winnipeg with a pair of wins against Montreal and Boston, two Atlantic Division rivals, and the Jets have vanquished both. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Jets have just finished taking on the Boston Bruins, and oh boy, it was a bit of a slaughter if you are a Bruins fan. Not a good time for you, but for Jets fans, they are probably feeling pretty dang good. Two nice wins on the road, both against pretty pesky opponents. Have to be pretty okay with that. Now, sure, maybe the starts against each opponent weren't perfect, but Winnipeg rallied in both, and we'll dive into each game individually. Also, just wanted to say apologies for no episode yesterday. Had a work event that kind of ran over, so you're going to get a double recap today. And also, you have a little bit of a point later to talk about a Jets power play that is almost perhaps too good for when the playoffs roll around. But we'll get to all of that in just a moment. Let's chat about the first game, though, Winnipeg versus Montreal. If you watched the first period, you probably would not have thought Winnipeg was coming out with a victory. Winnipeg was definitely slow, and I kind of said coming into this game, Montreal is a very fast, annoying team. They also just historically always give the Jets fits. It doesn't matter if they're having a good year or a bad year. Montreal is just one of those teams that, for one reason or another, Winnipeg I don't know why, but they struggle with it. It's kind of funny. There's a couple of teams that have always had Winnipeg's number, and the Habs in the past have, for some reason, just really taken it to the Jets. But it didn't really matter after the first period because Winnipeg kind of does what they've been doing recently, and when they face a team that's weaker than them, a squad that's really not playoff bound, they kind of remind them of their place in the league, man. The Jets have really been taking it to a lot of the lesser squads out there, and it's been very apparent that, you know, against bad opponents, Winnipeg's really not playing down to the level. They have, for the most part, kind of taken care of business. And it is a little bit different than last year because now you've got the Jets actually going through January without the typical seasonal January collapse. Winnipeg has generally been good enough to get through a lot of these games. And even if they've struggled at times, they usually rally. And I think this was one of those very good examples. It kind of got started off with, the top line doing top line stuff. They have generally against bad opponents been pretty good this year. Last year, I think, they struggled even in games against weaker squads. But this year, I think because Kyle Connor is such a 3-zone player now and has really turned his whole season around, it's been a very different experience. KFC is kind of carrying this trio on his Kentucky Fried shoulders, not because the other two have been doing badly. Scheifele and Velarde are both great players. It's just because Connor was such a liability defensively. They constantly spent a ton of time backtrapped in their own zone. And so the single change of him actually backtracking and, marking men a little more closely, actually trying to force turnovers and stuff, it has had a very profound impact on getting the puck further up the ice. So a really big change for the Jets. It couldn't have come at a better time for Winnipeg because you look at the rest of the playoff field this year, and the Jets might legitimately have, even according to Money Puck, they do have the best odds of winning the Cup as of right now. Still a long way to go. The playoffs can be a very challenging animal to predict, especially when, Winnipeg's playoff record recently hasn't been great. I have reasons for optimism around that this year. There are still some things for the Jets to kind of figure out, but I think with a really big trade deadline this year, it's going to be a fun time. But for, a game against Montreal where it was always promising to be pesky, top line went off, Gabriel Velarde with a couple of beautiful passes, Kyle Connor with a 2-goal effort, one of them a nasty little near post finish, another one a great one-time finish off of David Gustafsson, actually doing some really great work behind the net. He forechecked well, fed a great pass while being pinned to the wall, and Connor did not miss. I keep advocating for the idea of Gustafsson to get a bigger look with this team. I really feel like there's still a good player there, and a lot of what I said several years ago about him was that he was a forechecking force with very soft hands. And I think he's really starting to show more of that as he's getting more and more confident. He did not have a point in tonight's game against Boston, but, he had a 4-game point streak coming into this one, so you really can't complain. But against Montreal and some of these other teams, I think he's really shown that you probably don't want to bench him. I know that, as the lineup gets healthier and guys start returning, naturally there's going to be competition for spots. But I look at him and I really feel like, it's a little hard to really say that he should come out for some of these other guys. I think he has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is an intriguing talent there, and I really wish the Jets had maybe nurtured it a little more closely over the past couple of years, but it's definitely not too late. He still has some real potential to do some great stuff, and I think a game like this was perfect for him. Winnipeg needed somebody to help calm them down. He and the top line and a number of others really did some great work. Cole Perfetti notching yet another assist. Scheifele getting in on the action too with a great net front finish. I mean, just a lot of good stuff to see, right? Winnipeg at times has struggled in the past against bad opponents, but recently that's not really been the case. They have genuinely taken care of business, and over the past couple of weeks, their record has really reflected that. They have really just played pretty good hockey. All of this without Adam Lowry for several games now. And, I feel like some of the lines that struggled initially have been putting together a few more stronger shifts. Now, again, everything is still kind of a work in progress, and not all of it has been great. The puck management in some of these games, a little bit sketchy, and I think against better opponents, that may be where you are worried. But I have to sort of recalibrate my expectations sometimes because I think the league overall this year is considerably weaker, or at least it feels like it. Maybe that's not, the case in terms of points percentage and pace, but I don't know. I just have this feeling like a lot of the opponents the Jets have faced are really not that good. And I don't think it's anything that Winnipeg is necessarily doing. The Jets' power play and goaltending are still their two strongest things. The 5v5 play is kind of a little more closer to break even. But, having such an elite special teams unit and, the best goalie in the league and in the world, frankly, it goes a long way when you're facing a lot of these teams that just don't have the talent and skill to match up. And so far, Winnipeg has really done well. And I also kind of think it's a testament to the depth players. If there's never a group that I've really questioned, it's the bottom lines. These guys every game show up, and recently they've started contributing a little more offensively. Kupari even got himself an empty net goal, courtesy of a Nikolai Ehlers pass, so that's pretty funny. Kupari doesn't really get many goal-scoring opportunities, so really nice to see him pot one. And, for a dude who I think really has turned around his game a lot this year and has improved in a lot of facets, it's nice to see him get paid off for the work he's been doing. So, overall, very interesting performance, against an opponent that the Jets have traditionally struggled against. It's nice that Winnipeg walked in and won. And, I know we were talking about Ehlers maybe being interested in signing in Montreal after his contract ends. Perhaps this was a good argument to stick around with Winnipeg just a little bit longer. But of course, after taking down one big name in the Atlantic, Winnipeg then had another game tonight against Montreal's most hated rival in Boston. Let's chat about how that Bruins game went in just a brief moment. But before we go any further, did want to give you a shout out about our friends and partners at Gametime. I love going to live sporting and music events. I'm always a big concert guy. I go to hardcore shows, metalcore shows. I go to hockey games when I can. I'm going to Washington versus Winnipeg this weekend. Super excited about that. One of my favorite memories last year was going to a Knock Loose show. That was fantastic. And if you've never been and you like hardcore, you owe it to yourself. But you know that getting to these events can be a huge pain in the butt. You get hit with surprise fees, lots of surcharges, and no one likes that. Gametime doesn't either, and now they even have a new feature called Gametime Picks that filters out all the crap and fluff to show you only the best deals on the hottest seats. And best of all, you actually get in-venue views from where your seat is, so you know what you're paying for. Nobody likes a mystery. They don't either, and they'll help bring all of the upfront pricing when you toggle that feature on. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we just finished recapping Winnipeg versus Montreal, a bit of an Atlantic Division doubleheader tonight. Now we're chatting about Winnipeg versus Boston, which just wrapped up, and the Jets just completely ran over the Bruins. When you face some of these opponents that are well beneath you, sometimes it can go one of two ways, right? Like I said, against Montreal, you have moments where maybe you're coming out of the gate slowly, things don't look that great. This game really wasn't like that. I would say from the first period, it was a little back and forth and the Bruins got a couple of good looks, but I think for the most part, the Jets were generally the ones creating some of the most dangerous opportunities. And Winnipeg's power play finally got some more chances to do what it does best, which is just embarrassing other PKs and making them wonder how you're ever supposed to stop them. Nemesnikov got in on the goal scoring early. We saw, the power play later with some guys like Kyle Connor and company get in on the action. This was just a really nice performance across the board from pretty much everyone. Hellebuck was nice in that, sporting a 931. You had Scheifele with a big 2-goal performance. He is now tied with Covey for all-time goal-scoring franchise record. So one more, and he moves into first. Kyle Connor also chasing a 50-goal season. Scheifele is too. They're both at the top of the league right now. Top 5 among all goal scorers. Really impressive finishing from them this year. Ever since Scheifele was snubbed from Team Canada, he has seemingly been on a mission to make them regret it. Ehlers also notching himself a nice goal and an assist. He and that second line, I thought, had a really great night. Very active in the corners, creating loads of chances. Perfetti had an assist, probably could have had another point or two. Nemesnikov doing some good work down low. I think the real challenge with this trio is that it's just they have games like these every so often, but usually they're just not quite there against some of the top opponents. So if they can figure out how to make it work, I think that'd be great. I do think that this is probably one of those lines where if you're keeping Ehlers and Perfetti together, then you've got to find a center who can be a little more helpful in making the most of their two very different skill sets. So that's a pretty demanding position, I'm not going to lie. And I do have some thoughts later on perhaps another episode about how the Jets might look post-trade deadline, because I feel like you could skin this turkey or carve this turkey in a lot of different ways. But for this Bruins game, the Jets just pretty much across the board got it done, right? Parker Ford made his NHL debut. Honestly, I thought it should have happened last year. I came away from preseason last year thinking Ford looked pretty decent, and was kind of shocked that he didn't actually get a call-up after having a pretty nice season for the Moose. But Parker got the nod tonight against his hometown team, and as a reward, he got a nice goal off of a great Logan Stanley pass down low. Parker, in front of all his family and friends, got a nice goal. Ford is officially better than Ferrari, and just a great vibes game. And I think that this is kind of one of those things where maybe around this time last year the vibes were really down. This year, not so much. I mean, the Jets just seem to, aside from maybe a couple of tough road trips, they've really not let things get to them, perhaps in the way that they have in the past. And there have been a couple of tweaks that I think Arniel has made in how occasionally he'll, Garrett Hull pointed this out, but, we've seen this in a few games. One time it actually led to an Ehlers goal, but when a power play finishes, the 4 forwards sometimes stay out. And so, even at 5v5, it can lead to extended pressure and zone possession, which then sets up goal scoring opportunities. So just these small changes sometimes can have a nice impact. And I think, Winnipeg has on paper some of the schematics to be scary come playoff time. But I think now, the focus should be on starting to put this team through the paces and start adding some real big trade deadline pieces. This is a year where I feel like, you got to go all in. The playoff field's not that strong. Winnipeg has a really strong foundation to build on. And I think, this, I don't know. I don't want to say that it's it's going to, be the season, like 17-18. But I've mentioned it in the past that I feel like there have been some moments where there were like turning points that sort of echoed it. And maybe, the Lowry or Nemestikov injury earlier was kind of a turning point. The Jets trying some new lines. And then since the reunification, at least for now, the lines have generally been fine. Maybe some games they're a little more 50-50, but they still have the scoring talent to really compensate for it. So, I think that there's a lot of interesting stories with the squad this year. The only thing that I do kind of wonder about is, does Arneal really see Stanley as a playoff guy? I kind of hope not, because I think Stanley tries his hardest and he is working, every shift, but he just struggles to track opponents, especially when they're working down below the goal line or something or at speed. It's just not the place that he's really helpful. And when you get to the postseason, you're going to start seeing more teams that are really good at the goal mouth and crease area. So for the Jets, I think it's kind of important to really figure out your third pairing, and I don't think that you want to have Stanley kind of manning that role. So, all due respect, I think the Jets probably need to bring in another third pairing guy. I wouldn't really say that Heinola is necessarily the dude to be that third pairing anchor either. So, the Jets might want to bring in some experience. I would have liked if the Jets had found out this year if Heinola could do it, but for whatever reason, Arneal just doesn't envision him in any sort of role like that. So I wouldn't be shocked if Heinola is dealt at the trade deadline. I just feel like, he might request a trade at some point. I know that Chevy is personally a fan of his. It'll be interesting. So, lots to process there. But as far as this game is concerned, Winnipeg just made Boston look very amateurish. And the Bruins are not very good, I'll be honest. They have had a tough year. With this loss, they're only 3 games above 500 right now. So not a fun time for Bruins fans. But once Bergeron retired, I think everyone could kind of see the writing on the walls. That team has basically been living on borrowed time for many seasons. And I think it's just the Bills got to come due at some point. And I can kind of see that happening with the Jets one day, but I do hope that that's a lot further down the road. As far as this game was concerned, though, you just have to enjoy it, right? Top line goes off. Second line has a great game. Your depth lines do lots of great forechecking work. A lot of the defense gets in on the action. Sandberg was kind of stunting a lot offensively. He did notch himself an assist, but you just see the confidence from him this year. And you really just have to enjoy it, right? I think it's been nothing but positive vibes from them. Now, you may wonder if anyone from this Bruins team is worth keeping an eye on for a potential trade option. For the most part, I'm not really all that interested in anyone from this roster. The only guys that could potentially be a name I'd think about maybe are like, Marchand or Pasternak. I do, obviously neither of these guys are really going anywhere, at least is my guess. But one name I kind of wonder about, and I'm not like overly fond of him, but Pavel Zacha has kind of been pretty decent for the Bruins the past couple of seasons. I don't really anticipate that he's going to be a continual like 60-point sort of player for the Jets, but I feel like his game has been good enough to where I wonder if he's actually an interesting fit for the Jets. Zacha, I don't know again that he's like a crazy high-end player, but maybe he could be of interest. Again, I have some reservations about how much elite offensive ability he really has and how much of his recent scoring output is just because he's playing basically their de facto 1C role, right? They don't have anyone else. And so when you're playing with guys like Pasternak and whatnot, I think he's probably, benefiting from the ice time boost and his line mates. So I don't know that I necessarily look at him as a guy that I would be super after. And, the Bruins may also be asking a premium because he is their 1C right now. So it'll be interesting. But as far as Winnipeg is concerned, what a fun game. And I think heading into a really big performance this weekend against Washington, which I will be at, I am very excited. I haven't seen the Jets in a couple of years. So finally, a time when I can go down to DC and watch Winnipeg walk through and hopefully come away with a big win. It feels pretty darn nice. But I did joke earlier that the Jets' power play might actually be too good. And I'm only half joking. The reason why is, playoff hockey can be a little bit of a different animal. I want to chat about that in just a little bit and why I think the Jets really need to, for the remaining 25 or 30 games, really work on the 5v5 chance creation, right? That I think is one of the few things that maybe they still have some stuff to figure out. But we'll dive into that in just a moment. Before we go too much further, though, thought you should hear about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost over. Obviously, the Super Bowl is coming up. And with all of that in mind, I'm thinking about some big potential matchups. You've got Kelsey versus the Eagles secondary, Mahomes versus Hurts. And I think this is a great way to come away with a win if you are looking to get in on the action, right? You can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And for, all of you who are going to be watching the Super Bowl, personally, I may not be interested, but FanDuel can help make the experience so much better. You can bet on which players will score a touchdown, who could, come away with more points, and so much more. They've got tons of stats categories available and so many ways for you to win. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about Winnipeg and sort of the perhaps all too good power play. Obviously, it has been, a super hot start for this season. Winnipeg's power play is just absolutely killing it, and, you really can't hate it. It's been crazy good, and I think for the Jets, Winnipeg is maybe almost too good with their power play. I only half joke about that because, Winnipeg's power play is operating at 30 odd percent. It is on a historical pace. And with all of that in mind, when you get to the playoffs, right, oftentimes people say the hockey changes. Now, at even strength, that's not really the case. I mean, maybe coaching staffs become a little more conservative. Maybe it's not so back and forth constantly. But I think one of the biggest things that stands out about playoff hockey is the power play, right? You just get fewer of them. And when you don't have as many opportunities to get the man advantage, I think it makes it naturally, more apparent when Winnipeg's 5v5 game maybe isn't quite on par with, the rest of a lot of the top contenders. This year, I'm not so sure that that's going to be as big of a problem. I feel like a lot of teams at even strength have not been that good this year. The goaltending has gone down for a lot of squads. There seems to be more parity again, a lot of mediocrity. And if the Jets maintain their high seed, they may not have to worry about some of these teams that are, the more top-end contenders until later in the postseason, which for me can only be a good thing, right? If you don't have to see the Vegases of the world until later, that's probably about as good of an opportunity as you get. You have to hope somebody knocks them out, especially with the Knights having some issues this season. It would be great if we don't have to see that quality of opponent before you get to the Stanley Cup Finals or even just the Conference Finals, right? I'm thinking about that level of play because I think the Jets have a real chance this year to go a lot deeper than they have in a very long time. But the reason I kind of joke about the Jets' power play being too good is it comes with a reputation. Everyone knows that the Jets' power play is almost automatic. It's so good and so scary that I almost wonder if, whether it's conscious or not, NHL officials are going to be more lenient, right? They know that the Jets' power play can influence a game almost on a dime. And because of that, I worry that the Jets are actually going to get a lot fewer than, normal playoff teams would. You're already going to have fewer power plays in general in the postseason. And I can't imagine that the Jets having such a venomous unit that has such a reputation is actually going to make it any better. With that in mind, I think, the real focus going forward is how do you turn this team into a dominant, even strength squad against really good teams? They do it against mediocre and bad teams all the time. I never worry about that. It's why when you think about the playoffs now, early to start the season, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with this team. I thought that this might be a step back year for the team. I thought that Winnipeg may have, some real changes and adjustments that were going to take some time. Instead, Winnipeg has gone very veteran heavy for the most part. And, Arneal has kind of I would say, more iterated on the Bones formula. Not necessarily an overhaul, but a couple of smart tweaks here and there, a couple of things that maybe I'm less fond of. But for the most part, there's been some adjustments to make the team faster on the whole and apply pressure more, so that it better creates a little more offense. But in terms of the actual chance creation and shot generation, the Jets are still kind of, I would say, more middle of the pack because you've got a crazy power play and amazing goaltending. It's not a problem in the regular season, but once you get to the playoffs, I kind of wonder just how far they can take it. And that's where I think, a big trade deadline just completely changes the complexion of the team. I think the front office is already really aggressive. It sounds like Chevy is hunting and shopping. What I really hope doesn't happen is that they go shopping and they come away with very little. They've done that in the past where they've been on a lot of guys, but they don't end up closing the deal. So for me, I just want the Jets to be aggressively looking and bringing in some big talent. I think that they are keenly aware of doing this. I think that they plan to do it. I expect them to make some big swings. I'm curious to know just how big those swings are. Will it be termed? Will it be younger? Will they be looking for just rentals? I don't know. The Jets have traditionally lived in the rental zone. They didn't really even go for Kako, which I kind of thought would have been a smart play. Kako, just has a lot of upside, a former top 3 lottery pick sort of guy. And sure, the Rangers may have made him look not that great, but I feel like with prospect development there, you just don't see many young players really thrive. I mean, think of how long it took Lafreniere to actually thrive, and I don't think it was his fault. So Kako and a guy like that would have been an interesting fit here, but maybe the Jets should also just aim higher, right? Don't be as interested in risky plays. Go for guys with more established track records. I could see that being a really compelling argument. I will say I've seen some of you say don't mess with the chemistry, don't make trades, and I'm very much of the opposite mindset. Chemistry isn't always the most important thing, right? It's kind of like how I talk about face-offs. Face-offs situationally can have individually important moments, but they're not necessarily going to decide the game all the time for you. Sometimes, on the power play or the PK, it can be a really critical moment. But I think for the most part, right, it's what you do elsewhere on the ice at even strength that's really going to determine, the bulk of your success. And I think that's where Winnipeg should not only improve their 5v5 game by bringing in some big name players, but also it's a reward for this roster. These guys want the team to make trades. Like, the players would love to welcome new guys to the room. They think that they are cup contenders every time they go out there. And if they see that the front office is rewarding them by going after big assets, bringing in guys who have huge reputations for success, that's going to really amp this team up. Everyone's going to be on the same page. They're all going to be hyped. And I think we're going to have those 17-18 vibes again. I really feel like this team is on the cusp of greatness, and with a couple of changes, they are going to be back towards that direction. But again, they have to make those changes. I think that this team is kind of hitting the ceiling of where it can go at its current level. Now it's time to reach that next gear that can push them to a cup. So excited about all of that. I think March and trade deadline stuff is going to be crazy this year. Even before, we've actually got a trade currently ongoing right now that I'm going to talk about on Friday's episode, because it could have some impact on the trade market around the Jets. One of the players being exchanged is somebody that I was interested in Winnipeg going after. Looks like that's not going to be the case this time, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But I also want to talk tomorrow about Winnipeg versus Washington. That's the game I'm going to, and I want to say that this is probably, for me, one of the best barometers for where the Jets are at. Now, the Caps have been on the road a lot recently, so they may be fatigued, but the Jets have played a fair bit of hockey themselves, and they've done some traveling. So, you don't get to set the schedule. These teams are both going to be fighting for first, and I cannot wait to see which team emerges victorious. But let me know your score predictions for that. We'll have a preview of that episode on tomorrow's show, or that game on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here tomorrow with Jets versus Caps coverage. But for tonight, that is all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.